The Montana wilderness of 1887 held secrets darker than its moonless nights. Clara Boone lay bound to a pine, her thin dress no match for the mountain chill. The outlaws had left hours ago, taking their laughter, but leaving the dying fire. They needed bait for the beast that had been hunting their camp, and a 16-year-old orphan girl served their purpose. The wolves' distant howls grew closer with each passing hour. Clara watched the darkness between the trees thicken, felt the forest's attention turn toward her. Something massive moved just beyond her sight, disturbing branches, crushing underbrush beneath heavy paws. Then came the sound, not wolf, not bear, something ancient and hungry. What terror could make hardened outlaws sacrifice a child to save themselves? Before the social call to action, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Silence fell over the mining town of Bitter Creek at sunrise, the brief respite between the night's debauchery and the day's labor. Only Clara moved through the muddy street, her thin shoulders hunched against the morning chill. At 16, her eyes carried the weariness of someone far older. The Silver Spur saloon's back door creaked as Clara slipped inside. 2 years of cleaning, spilled whiskey, and worse had taught her to enter unnoticed. There you are, girl. Them floors ain't gonna scrub themselves. Mrs. Winters appeared from the kitchen, arms crossed over her ample bosom. Not cruel, but not kind either. Just another soul hardened by frontier life. Clara nodded, reaching for the bucket and brush. When her parents died of fever 4 winters ago, Mrs. Winters had taken her in. Not from charity, but for cheap labor. Still, it was shelter, food, more than most orphans had. Some gentlemen were asking after you last night. Mrs. Winters studied Clara's face, seemed mighty interested in where you came from. Clara's hands stilled. What did you tell them? Nothing they paid enough to hear, Mrs. Winters sniffed. But they'll be back tonight. Said they might have work for a young lady heading west. Hope flickered dangerously in Clara's chest. West meant Oregon. Green valleys, perhaps a family needing help with children. Anything but another year watching miners spend in one night what took her months to earn. That evening, she saw them the moment they entered. 5 men in dust-covered clothes too fine for ordinary travelers. Their leader, tall with a silver-streaked beard, surveyed the room with cold calculation. Silas Blackwood, he introduced himself later, tipping his hat with practiced charm. My associates and I have business opportunities in Oregon Territory. We find ourselves in need of someone with particular talents. I ain't got talents, sir. Clara kept her eyes down, remembering the rumors about girls who disappeared with smooth-talking men. Blackwood chuckled. Everyone has talents, Miss Boone. I understand you have an unusual memory, that you can recall every detail of anything you've seen, even just a glance. Clara's breath caught. No one knew that about her. Not even Mrs. Winters. Don't look so surprised. His voice dropped. There are people willing to pay handsomely for someone who can remember every word, every number on a page. We could use someone like that. Someone who could help us. Negotiate better terms with business associates? I don't know what you mean, sir. Safe passage to Oregon. $50 upon arrival. A recommendation to a respectable household. Blackwood leaned closer. Or you can keep scrubbing floors until your hands bleed. 3 days later, Clara sat rigid on a horse as Bitter Creek disappeared behind them. Mrs. Winters had seemed almost sad to see her go. Almost. The first night, Clara realized her mistake. These weren't businessmen. The way they checked their guns, spoke in code, divided their watch, these were outlaws. On the 4th night, she overheard them while pretending to sleep. The company wants those mineral rights. Silas, governor won't sign without seeing the original survey map. That's why we have the girl. Once we reach the territorial office, she'll see it for 5 minutes, then reproduce it perfect. No one the wiser. And after? Silas's voice hardened. The company doesn't leave loose ends. Clara's throat tightened. She was no passenger, she was a tool. And tools were discarded when their purpose was served. A week later, they caught her trying to escape. That night, they bound her to the pine tree near the mountains. leaving her as bait for the beast that had stalked their camp for days. "Nothing personal," Silas had whispered, patting her cheek almost fondly. "If the beast doesn't get you, we'll collect you in the morning. You've still got value." As darkness claimed the forest, Clara's fingers worked desperately at her bonds. The photograph, her only possession, pressed against her ankle inside her boot, the mother she barely remembered, standing before the grand house in St. Louis, where Clara had been born to a very different life than this one. A life stolen by misfortune, just as surely as these men planned to steal what remained of her future. The distant howl of wolves made her fingers work faster. Eli Carver rode alone through the towering pines, his weathered face impassive beneath his wide-brimmed hat. At 45, the creases around his eyes spoke of years squinting into horizons and gun sights alike. His black horse, Shadow, picked its way carefully along the narrow mountain trail as the last light faded from the sky. 22 years as a ranger had taught Eli the value of silence. The forest spoke volumes to those patient enough to listen, the soft pad of a cougar following a ridgeline, the warning rustle of disturbed underbrush, the unnatural quiet when danger lurked nearby. Tonight, something felt wrong. Shadow sensed it too, ears flicking nervously as they rode. "Easy, boy," Eli murmured, resting one hand on the horse's neck while the other remained near his holstered Colt. His current assignment lay 2 days' ride ahead, delivering sealed documents to Fort Kearny. The contents were unknown to him, but the weight of the marshal's words remained. "This needs to reach Colonel Hargrove personally." Matter of territorial security. Eli didn't ask questions. He'd stopped asking years ago after Shiloh, after he'd returned home to Tennessee to find his wife and daughter gone. Not just dead, but erased by raiders with such brutality that the memory still jolted him awake some nights. War had made him a soldier. That day had made him a ghost, a man who existed only to serve justice in its coldest form. The trail widened as moonlight spilled through a break in the clouds. Eli surveyed the valley below, noting the thin spiral of smoke from what might be a campfire, quickly deciding to make camp himself. He chose a small clearing ringed by dense bushes, offering concealment while providing clear sightlines in all directions. Shadow whickered softly as Eli removed his saddle. "I know," he said. "Something's out there." Dinner was cold jerky and hardtack. No fire tonight. Experience had taught him when to remain invisible. He sat with his back against a broad pine, allowing his eyes to adjust fully to the darkness. From his saddlebag, Eli retrieved an oilskin pouch containing the documents for Fort Kearny. He'd never opened the sealed papers, but the conversation overheard at the marshal's office nagged at his conscience. The company's investment in the territory must be protected, the well-dressed man had insisted. "These mining operations are vital to national interests." The marshal's response had been measured but firm. "Mr. Reed, I assure you the territorial authority takes these native disturbances seriously. But there are procedures. Procedures won't stop savages from interfering with progress," Reed had snapped. "These attacks on our operations cannot continue." Eli had ridden for the company before, escorting payrolls, providing security. The North Star Mining Company paid well and asked few questions about methods. Perfect for a man who preferred results to conversation, but lately stories troubled him. Entire native settlements relocated at gunpoint. Miners working in conditions that made slavery seem merciful. Reports of unusual accidents and disappearances near certain mountains. Shadow's sudden alertness drew Eli from his thoughts. The horse stood rigid, eyes fixed toward the east. Eli reached for his rifle. Movements deliberately slow, then he heard it. Not an animal sound, but something that made his blood run cold. A human scream, distant but clear, echoing through the canyon. A young woman's voice, terror evident even across the distance. Eli hesitated, hand moving to the pocket watch he always carried. He never opened it anymore, but the weight of it grounded him. reminded him of oaths taken and broken, the documents needed to reach Fort Kearney. Those were his orders, clear and simple. The scream came again, more desperate than before. Eli closed his eyes briefly. Orders were orders, but some choices defined a man more than any badge. "Come on, Shadow," he said, reaching for the saddle. "Seems we've got a detour." As he mounted, Eli's hand brushed against the marshal's star pinned inside his coat, rather than displayed openly. Authority was best revealed only when necessary, and in these mountains, a badge could make you either a target or a savior, depending on whose eyes beheld it. The moon disappeared behind clouds as Eli urged Shadow forward, guided only by another faint cry and the compass of a conscience he'd thought long dead. Dawn was hours away when Eli dismounted, tethering Shadow to a sturdy pine. The girl's screams had stopped, which worried him more than their continuation would have. Silence rarely meant safety. He drew his rifle, crouching to examine the forest floor. Moonlight filtering through branches revealed what his years of tracking confirmed were not normal animal prints. Too large for a bear, with 5 distinct digits ending in knife-like points. The stride length suggested something that moved partially upright. "What in hell?" he muttered, measuring one print with his hand. His palm barely covered half its width. Moving with deliberate quiet, Eli followed the tracks, noting with growing unease how they circled toward the dying glow of a campfire ahead. The scent of fear has its own distinctive odor. Any predator can sense it, man or beast. Tonight, that scent hung heavy in the cool mountain air. The clearing appeared suddenly between the trees. A girl, young, dirty, terrified, sat bound to a thick pine trunk. Her eyes, wide with fear, locked onto him immediately. She shook her head frantically, trying to warn him away. Eli raised one finger to his lips, then pointed to his ear, questioning if she heard something. She nodded, jerking her chin toward the eastern edge of the clearing. That's when he saw it, a shadow darker than the night, massive and hunched at the tree line. It wasn't moving like any animal Eli had encountered in 20 years of frontier life. It seemed to be watching, assessing. "Stay still," he whispered, approaching the girl with his rifle raised. "I'm going to cut you loose. Behind you!" she gasped. Eli spun as something burst from the underbrush, not from the east where the shadow lurked, but from the north. A blur of movement too fast to track properly. Eli fired instinctively, the rifle's report shattering the forest quiet. A howl echoed through the trees, pain mixed with rage, followed by the sound of heavy bodies crashing through vegetation. Not one creature but several, converging on the clearing. "No time," Eli growled, holstering his rifle and drawing his hunting knife. 2 quick slices freed the girl's hands and feet. "Can you run?" She nodded, scrambling to stand on legs stiff from being bound. Eli steadied her with one hand while the other drew his Colt. "Head for my horse," he ordered. "Black Stallion, 50 yards that way." Something massive shifted at the edge of the dying firelight. Not a bear. Bears don't stand 7 feet tall on hind legs. Its face remained in shadow, but its chest bore a matted patch where Eli's bullet had struck. Not enough to kill it. Just enough to make it angry. When it stepped forward, the girl gasped. "It's not what they said it was," she whispered. "It's not an animal at all." Eli had no time to question her meaning. The creature charged, covering the distance with unnatural speed. Eli fired twice, pushing the girl behind him. The creature staggered but didn't fall. In the brief muzzle flash, Eli caught a glimpse of its face, a visage that would haunt his dreams for months to come. Not fully animal, yet not human either. Something between worlds, with intelligence burning in eyes too aware for a simple beast. The girl tugged his arm. "There are more coming. We have to go." From the forest, answering calls echoed, a language of growls and clicks that no natural Montana predator should possess. They ran, the girl surprisingly swift despite her ordeal. When they reached Shadow, the horse danced nervously, eyes rolling white with terror. "Up!" Eli commanded, boosting her onto the saddle before swinging up behind her. As they wheeled to depart, something lunged from the darkness. Eli felt searing pain across his back as claws raked down, catching his saddle leather instead of his spine. Shadow reared, nearly unseating them both, before bolting down the trail without urging. They rode hard for 20 minutes before Eli dared slow their pace. The girl clung to the saddle horn, her breathing ragged. "They won't follow us across the river," she said with strange certainty. "What were those things?" Eli demanded. "And who are you?" "Clara Boone." She didn't turn to face him. "And I don't know what they are. But the men who left me there, they do." "The men who left you as bait," Eli clarified, anger edging his voice. Clara nodded, her slight shoulders tense beneath her torn dress. "They're coming back for me at dawn. They still need me. Well, they'll be disappointed." Eli checked his ammunition. "Because I'm not inclined to give you back." "You don't understand," Clara whispered. "They'll hunt us both now." "Let them try," Eli replied, urging Shadow toward the river she'd mentioned. "I've been hunted by worse than outlaw trash." Clara turned slightly, studying his face in the pre-dawn light. "No," she said quietly. "You haven't." The eastern sky lightened as they forded the shallow river. Clara sat rigidly in front of Eli, her body tense with exhaustion and weariness. They had ridden for hours, putting distance between themselves and whatever lurked in those woods. "We'll rest here," Eli said, guiding Shadow into a sheltered ravine where a small spring bubbled over rocks. "No fire." Clara nodded silently, sliding from the horse with surprising grace for someone who'd spent the night bound to a tree. She immediately put the horse between herself and Eli, a subtle movement that spoke volumes about her trust in rescuers. "I'm not going to hurt you," Eli said, keeping his distance as he unsaddled Shadow. "Name's Eli Carver. I work as a ranger in these territories. You should have left me," Clara replied, her voice barely audible. "They'll come looking." "They always do? The men who tied you up?" "Silas Blackwood and his gang." She watched Eli closely, measuring his reaction. Recognition flickered across Eli's weathered face. Blackwood had a reputation that stretched across 3 territories: robbery, murder, and worse. Not the usual random outlaws, but men who took specific jobs for specific payments. Why would Blackwood's gang need a girl? Eli asked, unpacking jerky and hardtack from his saddlebag. Clara accepted the food with hesitant hands. "I have a skill they need." "Must be quite a skill. I remember things. Everything I see exactly as I see it." She took a small bite of jerky. "Pages of documents, maps, faces. One glance is all I need." Eli considered this. A human camera would indeed be valuable to men like Blackwood. "That why they left you as bait instead of just killing you? Still needed your eyes?" Clara's jaw tightened. "They said if the beast didn't get me, they'd return at dawn. They need me alive to see something in Clearwater. Clearwater's 4 days' ride from here. 3 if we cut through Blackridge Pass." Eli raised an eyebrow. "No one cuts through Blackridge. Too many ambush points. Blackwood's men won't expect that route." Clara met his gaze directly for the first time. "And those things won't follow us there. You seem mighty certain about creatures you claim not to understand." Clara looked away. "I've heard things. The gang talks when they think I'm asleep." Eli didn't press further, recognizing the signs of someone parceling out truth in careful measures. He'd done the same often enough. "Get some rest," he said, handing her his bedroll. "I'll keep watch." Clara hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" It was a fair question. Rangers had their own missions, their own priorities. Eli felt the weight of the documents in his saddlebag, orders that should have superseded all other concerns. "Some things a man can't ride past," he answered. Simply. Clara didn't seem satisfied with his response, but exhaustion won over suspicion. She wrapped herself in the bedroll, keeping her back to a large boulder, her face toward Eli, not trusting him enough to turn away. While she slept, Eli examined the claw marks on his saddle. 5 distinct gouges, deeper than any bear or mountain lion could make. Something about their pattern nagged at his memory, similar to markings he'd seen years ago in another territory, in a cave where settlers had been found torn apart. When Clara whimpered in her sleep, Eli glanced over. her face contorted in some nightmare vision, words tumbling from her lips. Silver in the stone. They guard it. Can't let them open the door. By midday, they were moving again. Clara seemed marginally more at ease, though Eli noted how her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert for pursuit. As they navigated a narrow trail, Eli took out his knife and a small piece of pine wood. His hands worked methodically, carving as they rode. "What are you making?" Clara asked, curiosity temporarily overcoming her reticence. "Insurance," Eli replied, testing the whistle he'd shaped. He blew 3 distinct notes, short, long, short. "If we get separated, this sound carries farther than a voice. You hear this pattern, you know it's me." He handed her the finished whistle. Clara studied it before carefully tucking it into her boot. "I won't need it," she said. "I'm leaving once we reach the next town." Eli didn't contradict her, but they both knew the truth. Blackwood's men wouldn't stop hunting her. And if the creatures from the forest were following too, as Eli suspected from the unusual tracks he'd spotted twice during their journey, then Clara's options were dangerously limited. "Those creatures," Eli said casually. "The ones that aren't animals. What do Blackwood's men call them?" Clara stiffened. After a long pause, she answered, "They don't have a name for them, but the company men, they call them guardians." The abandoned trapper's cabin stood like a forgotten sentinel in a small clearing. Eli circled it twice before approaching, rifle ready. 2 days of hard riding had left them both exhausted, but safety trumped comfort. "Wait with shadow," he instructed Clara, who nodded silently, one hand resting on the wooden whistle at her throat. The cabin's door hung askew on rusted hinges. Inside, dust coated every surface except for a narrow path across the floor and indentations on a crude bunk. Someone had used this place recently. "It's clear," Eli called, emerging to help Clara dismount. "Not much, but it'll keep the weather out." As dusk settled, they established an uneasy routine. Eli reinforced the door, while Clara swept years of dust from the single room. Neither suggested a fire despite the evening chill. Smoke would announce their presence more effectively than a shout. "Jerky again," Eli said apologetically, dividing their rations. "We can try fishing at dawn." Clara accepted her portion without comment, those watchful eyes constantly moving between the windows and door. Survivor's instincts, Eli recognized. He'd seen it in soldiers after particularly brutal campaigns, that hypervigilance that never quite faded. "Blackwood's men," Eli ventured as they ate. "You said they work for the company." Clara tensed. "I didn't say that. You mentioned company men yesterday." "The North Star Mining Company?" The girl's silence was confirmation enough. Eli had transported payrolls for North Star twice before, always with excessive security. A mining outfit with their own private army suggested operations beyond simple ore extraction. "My current assignment," Eli said carefully, "involves documents bound for Fort Kearney. Documents concerning North Star's territorial rights." Clara's head snapped up. "You're working for them too?" "I'm working for the Territorial Marshal's office," Eli corrected. "Delivering papers I haven't read. But I'm starting to wonder if I should have." "Don't," Clara's voice hardened. "The less you know, the better chance you have of staying alive." A branch snapped outside, distant but distinct. Both froze, listening intently as Eli extinguished their single candle. In the sudden darkness, Clara's breathing quickened. "One rider," Eli whispered, peering through a crack in the shuttered window. "Coming slow from the south." "Scout," Clara breathed. "Blackwood always sends Jackson ahead to track." Eli nodded, impressed by her calm analysis. "Stay inside, no matter what you hear." The night air bit through Eli's coat as he slipped out the back window, circling through dense undergrowth until he positioned himself behind the approaching rider. The man moved with the caution of someone who'd spent years avoiding hangman's ropes. Scanning the clearing methodically before dismounting, Eli waited until the scout had secured his horse and drawn his pistol before pressing his rifle barrel against the man's spine. "That's far enough, friend," Eli said quietly. "Drop the gun, or I drop you." The man froze, then slowly released his weapon. "Don't want no trouble, mister. Just looking for shelter. And tracking a girl," Eli added. How many rides behind you, Jackson? The scout's shoulders stiffened at his name. Don't know what you're talking about. Let's not waste time. Blackwood sent you. How many men and how far? A tense silence stretched between them before the scout answered. 6 men. Half a day behind. But you'd be smart to hand her over before they arrive. Because Blackwood's just the hired help. It's who he's working for that you should worry about. Eli relieved the man of his remaining weapons before marching him to the cabin door. Inside, slowly, Clara flinched when they entered, but quickly regained her composure, recognition flickering in her eyes. "Hello, Jackson," the scout nodded warily. "Miss Boone, Mr. Blackwood is mighty concerned for your safety." "I'm sure he is," she replied coldly. While Eli bound the scout to a chair, Clara searched through the man's saddlebags. Her systematic efficiency impressed Eli, not the random rummaging of panic, but the deliberate search of someone who knew what to look for. "Found something," she announced, extracting a crumpled yellow telegram. Her eyes scanned it quickly, brow furrowing. "What is it?" Eli asked. "Their orders." Clara handed him the paper. "It looks like innocent travel arrangements, but it's coded." Eli read the seemingly mundane message about cattle shipments and train schedules. "You can decode this?" Clara nodded grimly. "They taught me the system to transcribe messages. It says North Star's director is sending additional men. They're not just coming to retrieve me anymore. What else?" Eli pressed, noting her troubled expression. "They've been authorized to eliminate any witnesses." Her eyes met his. "Including territorial officials who interfere." Jackson laughed softly from his chair. "Told you, Ranger, this ain't about some runaway girl. The company protects its investments, and what's in the mountains is worth more than either of you." "What's in those mountains?" Eli demanded. The scout's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. "Why don't you ask her? She's seen the maps. She knows what the Guardians are protecting." Clara's face had gone pale. "We need to leave now." "It's dark," Eli objected. "We'll break the horse's leg. We'll be dead by morning if we stay," she countered, already gathering their meager supplies. "And it's not just Blackwood's men we need to worry about. There was another message in that code." "What message?" Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. "The Guardians have left their territory. They're hunting too." They rode through the night, the captured scout Jackson securely bound and draped uncomfortably across his own horse, which Eli led behind Shadow. Dawn found them descending into a narrow canyon where a swift creek cut through steep walls of weathered granite. "We need to stop," Eli said, noting Clara's exhaustion. The girl had barely spoken since they fled the cabin, her face drawn with fatigue and something deeper, fear certainly, but also the burden of knowledge she'd been reluctant to share. "Not yet," Clara insisted, scanning the ridgeline above. "Another hour. There's a place ahead where the canyon walls provide better cover." Eli studied her with growing curiosity. "You know these mountains well for someone who was traveling with Blackwood's gang." "I have a good memory," she replied simply. The defensiveness in her tone was familiar to Eli. The sound of someone guarding secrets not just from others, but from themselves. Some truths were too dangerous to acknowledge fully. The hiding place Clara led them to proved ideal, a shallow cave behind a curtain of wild grapevines, with the creek nearby and clear sightlines to both canyon approaches. Eli secured Jackson to a stunted pine, gagging him to prevent any warning calls to potential pursuers. While Clara gathered water, Eli examined the contents of Jackson's saddlebags more thoroughly. Among the expected supplies, he found a leather folio containing several official-looking documents bearing the North Star Mining Company's embossed letterhead. When Clara returned, he held them up. "Time for straight talk. What does North Star want with you? And what are these Guardians protecting?" Clara set down the water skin, her shoulders slumping with resignation. "You won't believe me. Try me. I've seen enough strange things in these territories to keep an open mind." She hesitated, then knelt and smoothed a patch of dirt. With a piece of charred wood from Jackson's supplies, she began to draw, her hand moving with precise, confident strokes that spoke of exceptional skill. "This is what they're after," she explained, sketching a detailed map of the surrounding mountain range. These peaks contain silver deposits, but not ordinary silver. The natives call it spirit metal. It has unusual properties. What kind of properties? It doesn't tarnish. It's lighter than normal silver, but stronger than steel. And when properly refined, she paused, looking up at him. It can store energy. Massive amounts of energy, Eli frowned. What kind of energy? The kind that could power weapons more destructive than anything in existence. Clara continued sketching, adding symbols at specific locations. These are the Guardian sites. The tribal elders who originally inhabited these mountains made some kind of pact with the Guardians centuries ago, protection in exchange. For keeping the spirit metal untouched, you expect me to believe in some mystical agreement with monsters. I didn't believe it either until I saw one up close. Clara's hand trembled slightly. They're not animals, Eli, they're intelligent, and they only attack those who threaten the sacred sites. How do you know all this? Clara's expression darkened. Because I'm not just some orphan girl Blackwood found useful. My father was Professor William Boone, chief geologist for North Star Mining Company. He discovered the spirit metal 5 years ago and learned about the Guardians from local tribes. Understanding dawned on Eli's face. And when he realized what North Star planned to do with his discovery, they murdered him and my mother. Clara finished, her voice hollow. I was 11, hiding in a cabinet when they came. I heard everything. How the company planned to harvest the spirit metal regardless of consequences. How my father had hidden his complete research notes and maps. And they kept you alive, hoping you'd seen those documents. Clara nodded. I have. Every page, every map, every calculation. In here, she tapped her temple. Father made me memorize them as a game, not knowing he was giving me the only thing keeping me alive once he was gone. Why didn't you just draw the maps for them? Because what my father discovered wasn't just about the metal. Clara added final details to her charcoal map. It was about what happens if too much is removed. The Guardians aren't just protecting the mountains. They're containing something beneath them, something my father believed could destroy half the territory if disturbed. Eli studied the detailed map with newfound respect for Clara's abilities. And North Star knows this? They know enough to want control of it. Their director, Augustus Reed, doesn't care about the risks. He sees government contracts, weapons that could win wars before they begin. From his bound position, Jackson made muffled sounds of warning. Eli turned to see the scout's wide eyes fixed on something beyond the cave entrance. Company man, Clara whispered, quickly obscuring her charcoal map. They always wear those black dusters. Eli peered carefully through the grapevine curtain. A single rider had stopped at the canyon junction below, methodically surveying the terrain with field glasses. Unlike the rough clothing of Blackwood's men, this figure wore the unmistakable uniform of North Star's private security force, men hired more for their willingness to kill than any mining expertise. He's searching for sign, Eli murmured. How did they get ahead of us? Clara's expression was grim. They're not following us. They're surrounding us. Clearwater welcomed visitors with the suspicious hostility of a town whose prosperity depended on secrets. A single rutted street lined with false-fronted buildings stretched between the lumber mill at one end and the imposing North Star Mining Company offices at the other, the alpha and omega of local commerce. Eli and Clara rode in at dusk, their appearances deliberately altered. Clara wore Eli's spare shirt and trousers, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat, while Eli had shaved his trail beard and donned the black duster taken from the company man they'd managed to evade 2 days prior. Remember, Eli murmured as they passed the first buildings. You're my nephew Thomas, struck mute by the trauma of our wagon accident. Don't speak under any circumstances. Clara nodded, keeping her head down as curious eyes tracked their progress. They had abandoned their captive Jackson miles back, bound securely but with enough slack to eventually free himself. By then, they hoped to have gleaned enough information in Clearwater to plot their next move. The Silver Strike Hotel stood at the center of town, its weathered sign promising clean beds and hot meals. As they dismounted, a tall figure in a sheriff's badge approached, thumbs hooked in his belt. "Evening, stranger," the lawman said, his assessment of Eli deliberate and thorough. "Don't recall seeing you in Clearwater before?" "First visit," Eli replied, adjusting his stolen duster. "John Miller. This here's my sister's boy, Thomas. Looking for lodging and a decent meal. Sheriff Mills." The man's handshake was unnecessarily firm, a small assertion of dominance that Eli recognized from 100 frontier towns. "Business in Clearwater?" "Hoping to find some," Eli answered smoothly. "I understand North Star's always looking for experienced men." Mills' expression shifted subtly. "You worked mines before." "Managed security for the Denver and Pacific Railroad. Heard North Star pays better." The calculated reference to security experience had its intended effect. Mills relaxed marginally, his tone becoming almost cordial. "You heard right. Company's particular about who it hires, but good men are welcome." Inside the hotel, Clara kept her face averted while Eli secured a room. The lobby hosted a half-dozen rough-looking men playing cards. Miners by their clothes, though their weapons suggested secondary professions. One man's face triggered recognition in Clara. She tugged Eli's sleeve in warning. Their room proved small but clean, with a single window overlooking the alley behind the hotel. Once the door was locked, Clara whispered, "The man with the red beard. That's Carter, one of Blackwood's gang. He wasn't dressed as a miner when I last saw him." Eli nodded grimly. "Seems Blackwood's men are already embedded here. We'll need to—" A soft knock interrupted him. They exchanged alarmed glances before Eli moved to the door, hand on his holstered pistol. "Mr. Miller?" A woman's voice, cultured and low. "I'm Dr. Sarah Lansing. Sheriff Mills mentioned you and your nephew might need medical attention after your wagon accident." Eli opened the door cautiously to reveal a tall woman in her 30s, carrying a medical bag. Her auburn hair was pinned severely beneath a practical hat, her clothing modest but well-made. "We're fine, Doctor. Just tired." She smiled thinly.
I insist."
"The boy particularly looks in need of examination." Something in her steady gaze conveyed a message beyond her words. After a brief hesitation, Eli stepped aside to admit her. Once inside, Dr. Lansing set down her bag and spoke in a near whisper. "Whatever story you've told Mills is almost certainly already reported to North Star. This town has no secrets except from outsiders. Why are you telling us this?" Eli asked, hand still near his weapon. "Because I recognize a disguise when I see one." She glanced meaningfully at Clara. "And because I knew Professor Boone." Clara's composure cracked. "You knew my father?" Dr. Lansing's expression softened. "I was the physician who examined his body after the accident. No mining collapse breaks a man's fingers individually before crushing his skull." "Why haven't you left?" Eli asked. "Same reason I'm helping you now. Someone needs to document what's happening here." She reached into her pocket and extracted a silver dollar, placing it on the table. "Try to scratch it." Eli drew his knife and pressed the blade against the coin. The steel skated off the surface without leaving a mark. When he lifted the dollar, its surprising lightness startled him. "Spirit metal," Clara whispered. Dr. Lansing nodded. "Your father's discovery. North Star has been refining it in secret for nearly 2 years. But the mining operation is destabilizing something in the mountains. The Guardians are retaliating," Clara supplied. "Is that what you call them?" "The miners have another name, Mountain Devils. 15 men killed in the last month. Torn apart." Lansing's scientific detachment faltered. "But they're not mindless beasts. They're selecting targets, only attacking those who work certain mining sites." "What have you documented?" Eli asked. "Enough to concern the territorial governor, if I could get it to him." She glanced toward the window. "But no one leaves Clearwater without company permission anymore." "And the sheriff?" "Mills does whatever North Star requires. His deputies are company men with badges." She repacked her medical bag, preparing to leave. "I've stayed too long already." "If you're who I think you are, Clara Boone, there's a price on information about you. Why help us?" Eli asked. Dr. Lansing paused at the door. "Because your father was right, Clara. His journal mentioned something beneath the mountains, something the spirit metal and the Guardians are somehow containing. Northstar's greed could unleash a disaster beyond imagination. After she departed, Clara turned to Eli, her young face grave with responsibility. We need to find Sarah's documentation and get it to someone with authority. Eli touched the papers in his coat, his original mission to Fort Kearney now feeling like a betrayal. I think I'm carrying orders that would give Northstar everything they want. Official territorial approval for expanded operations. Then we're already too late, Clara whispered. Morning brought the rhythmic clanging of the mine shift bell. Eli watched from their hotel window as men trudged toward the mountains, their faces already blackened with coal dust from previous shifts. Among them walked several figures whose alert postures and clean hands marked them as guards rather than laborers. 6 men at the north entrance alone, Eli noted. Your friend Carter left with them. Clara sat cross-legged on the bed, sketching from memory the mountain passages her father had mapped. They're expanding into the forbidden tunnels, the ones where the Guardians are most active. We need to see what's in those mines. First, we need allies, Clara countered. Dr. Lansing mentioned documentation. That needs to reach the territorial governor. They ventured out separately, Clara maintaining her disguise as the mute boy Thomas while exploring the town. Eli presenting himself at the Northstar office as a security professional seeking employment. The company headquarters occupied a 3-story building with pretensions of Eastern elegance. Inside, a clerk directed Eli to the security office, where a hard-faced man named Merrick conducted a perfunctory interview. Railroad security, you say? Merrick's eyes were cold, assessing. Any experience with labor disputes? Broke up my share of strikes, Eli replied, adopting the callous demeanor expected. Men tend to see reason when properly motivated. Merrick's smile didn't reach his eyes. We value that attitude at Northstar, though our current concerns are less about strikes and more about local wildlife. Heard about your mountain devil problem. Exaggerated stories, Merrick waved dismissively. But we do have issues with claim jumpers and natives who don't respect progress. Starting pay is $3 daily, plus ammunition. When can you start? Need to settle my nephew first, Eli hedged. Boy's not right in the head since the accident. Dr. Lansing mentioned him. Company maintains an orphanage for such cases, children of workers who've met with unfortunate incidents. The casual mention of orphaned children sent a chill through Eli. I'll consider it. Meanwhile, I'd appreciate seeing your operation. Always like to know what I'm protecting. Of course, Merrick rose. I'll arrange a tour for tomorrow. In the meantime, Sheriff Mills could use an extra deputy for tonight's patrol. Interested? The opportunity to access law enforcement information was too valuable to decline. By noon, Eli wore a deputy's badge, accompanying Mills on his rounds while mentally mapping the town's security arrangements. Clara, meanwhile, had made her own discoveries. Playing the role of a simple-minded boy had allowed her to wander the town largely unnoticed. Behind the general store, she overheard a conversation between the owner and a Native American trader that confirmed her worst fears. Another family disappeared from the reservation last night, the trader reported quietly. That makes 17 this month. The company men come with papers claiming their land has been legally purchased. Nothing legal about it, the shopkeeper muttered. Those deeds are forged. Everyone knows it, but who's going to challenge Northstar? When Clara and Eli reconvened in their room that evening, they exchanged information in hushed tones. Mills has patrols coordinated with Northstar Security, Eli reported. They're expecting something to happen tonight. Doubled the guards at the North Mine entrance. The natives believe the Guardians are becoming more aggressive because of a new tunnel, Clara replied. Apparently, Northstar's latest excavation is directly beneath the main Guardian site my father identified. A soft knock interrupted them. Dr. Lansing entered quickly, her face tight with tension. We don't have much time, she whispered, unrolling a map on the table. This was in the county records office. Look what they've done. The territorial land grant map showed North Star's holdings extending far beyond their legal claims, encompassing nearly all the sacred sites Clara had identified in her sketches. Penciled annotations indicated recent acquisitions of native lands through clearly fraudulent means. The governor's signature is forged, Lansing pointed out, as is the territorial judge's. North Star is creating legal cover for what amounts to theft on an unprecedented scale. Why would... Eli began. But Clara interrupted. The spirit metal, she said, tracing the boundaries of North Star's false claims. They've mapped the entire deposit. They must have found my father's research notes. Dr. Lansing shook her head. Not all of them. They're still searching for something, the main Guardian site. Augustus Reed himself arrived yesterday, demanding faster progress. Reed is here. Clara went pale. He'll recognize me. He was there the night they killed my parents. He's scheduled to inspect the North Mine tomorrow, Lansing continued. Something about a breakthrough they've made. Eli studied the map intently. These new tunnels run directly toward this mountain. He pointed to a peak Clara had marked in her own sketches. What's there? The heart of the Guardian territory, Clara whispered. What my father called the containment chamber. He believed it held something the tribe sealed away centuries ago, something the spirit metal and the Guardians were meant to imprison. A deputy's voice called from the street below. Mills wants all men at the North Mine. They've broken through to a new chamber. Dr. Lansing gathered the map hastily. I have to go. They'll call for me if there are injuries. Be careful, Clara urged. If they've reached the chamber, I'll report back what I find, Lansing promised. Slipping out the door, Eli checked his weapons. Decision made. I'm going too. Deputy Badge should get me access. And leave me here? Clara's voice held an edge of fear she couldn't quite disguise. No, Eli replied grimly. I've seen how this town operates. Nowhere's safe for you now. He handed her his spare pistol. Time to see what's got the company willing to risk unleashing those Guardians. The North Mine entrance blazed with lantern light, throwing grotesque shadows against the mountainside as men rushed in and out with purposeful urgency. Eli, deputy's badge gleaming on his chest, blended seamlessly with the perimeter guards, while Clara kept to the shadows. Her disguise now supplemented by a miner's cap and oversized jacket. They found something big, a guard confided to Eli between drags on his cigarette. Whole new chamber full of that special silver. Reed himself went down with Merrick. Special how? Eli prompted. The man glanced around before lowering his voice. Company's been testing it for weapons. Saw him demonstrating bullets to some government men last month. Shot clean through 3 inches of steel plate like it was paper. A commotion at the mine entrance interrupted them. Men emerged, carrying a stretcher, the body upon it covered with a canvas tarp. Dr. Lansing followed, her medical bag clutched tightly, face ashen in the lamplight. Eli intercepted her as she passed. What happened? Guardian attack, she whispered. 3 men dead. But they caught one. Caught a Guardian? Eli couldn't mask his surprise. Reed had special restraints made from the spirit metal. They're bringing it up now. Her eyes found Clara lurking nearby. They're excited about something else they found, some kind of chamber with markings. Clara's expression tightened with alarm. We need to see it. Impossible, Lansing replied. Reed's ordered the area sealed. Only senior company men allowed. Their conversation ended abruptly as shouting erupted from the mine entrance. A group of men emerged surrounding something massive. Even from a distance, Eli could make out a cage constructed of silvery metal bars, containing a form that moved with unsettling, almost human deliberation. They're taking it to the company laboratory, Lansing murmured. Behind the main office. We need to, Eli began, but stopped as a familiar figure emerged from the mine. Carter, the man Clara had identified as one of Blackwood's gang, was scanning the crowd with deliberate attention. When his gaze passed over Clara, he paused, then looked again more carefully. He's made you, Eli said quietly. Time to go. They slipped away from the mine entrance, moving casually until they reached the edge of the gathered crowd. As they turned toward town, a shout rose behind them. That's her! The Boone girl, Carter's voice triggered an immediate response. Guards moved to block their path while Eli drew his pistol, creating momentary confusion by firing into the air. "Run!" he commanded, pushing Clara ahead as chaos erupted. They sprinted down the dark street, pursued by the sound of boots and shouted commands. At the hotel, they paused only long enough to collect their few possessions before continuing toward the stables. Going somewhere, Sheriff Mills stepped from the shadows, revolver aimed squarely at Eli's chest. "I knew there was something off about you, Deputy. We've seen what North Star is doing," Eli replied, hands raised slightly. "Forged land grants, illegal mining, weapons development. Progress comes at a price," Mills answered coldly. "Montana's future will be built on that spirit metal. You think Washington cares about a few displaced Indians or some mountain legends?" The sound of approaching men grew louder. Mills smiled thinly. "Reed's offering $500 for the girl. Delivered alive, of course. He needs what's in that pretty head of hers." Clara, standing slightly behind Eli, had worked her hand into her jacket pocket. The wooden whistle Eli had carved days earlier was cool against her fingers. The piercing three-note signal she blew startled Mills just enough. Eli lunged forward, knocking the sheriff's gun aside as it discharged. The men crashed to the ground in a desperate struggle. "Get the horses!" Eli shouted, landing a solid blow to Mills's jaw. Clara raced to the stable, fumbling with trembling hands to saddle Shadow and her own mount. Behind her, the sounds of fighting continued, punctuated by shouts as North Star's men converged on the scene. Eli appeared minutes later, blood streaming from a cut above his eye, but moving with determined haste. "Mills won't be following us. Others will." They rode hard, pounding down the main street toward the eastern edge of town, where the forest offered cover. Shots rang out behind them, bullets splintering wood as they passed the last buildings. "Clara!" Dr. Lansing's voice called from the shadows. The physician stepped from behind a small chapel, leading a saddled horse. "This way!" There's a trail through the old creek bed. With Lansing guiding them, they veered north, following a dried stream bed that cut through dense underbrush. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew more organized. Lanterns moving in the distance, dogs barking. "They've released the hounds," Lansing explained breathlessly as they rode. "And worse, Reed brought something from the mine. Some kind of weapon using the spirit metal." As if summoned by her words, a strange humming sound filled the air, followed by a flash of blue-white light. A tree 30 yards to their left exploded, showering them with splinters. "What was that?" Eli demanded. "Rifle with spirit metal ammunition," Lansing replied. "They've been testing them for months." Another shot illuminated the forest, closer this time. Clara cried out, clutching her arm where a fragment had grazed her. "There's an abandoned church 2 miles ahead," Lansing directed. "We can shelter there until first light. Why are you helping us?" Eli asked as they pushed their mounts harder. "Because I've seen what's in that chamber they found." Fear edged Lansing's voice. "Native paintings showing the destruction of entire villages. And worse, Reed plans to extract whatever power source the Guardians have been containing. He thinks it's the key to weapons that could dominate the continent." Clara shuddered. "My father's notes warned specifically against that. The containment exists for a reason." As they crested a rise, the silhouette of a small, steepled church appeared against the night sky, their temporary sanctuary. But behind them, the lights of pursuit still bobbed through the trees, and somewhere in the darkness surrounding them, something else moved, larger shadows following a parallel course. Neither fully animal nor human in their deliberate, stalking progress, the abandoned church stood in a small clearing, its weathered boards silver in the moonlight. Inside, dust covered the few remaining pews, and a hole in the roof allowed a shaft of moonlight to illuminate the simple altar. "No one's been here for years," Eli observed, securing the doors while Dr. Lansing tended to Clara's injured arm. "The mining company bought the land 5 years ago," Sarah explained, cleaning the wound with practiced efficiency. "Drove the congregation away when they refused to sell. This was once part of the Blackfoot Winter Territory. Clara winced as Sarah applied a stinging antiseptic. You seem to know a lot about local history for a town doctor. I came to Clearwater 3 years ago to study native medicine, Sarah replied, bandaging the arm. I'm an ethnologist, as well as a physician. The medical practice simply allowed me to stay and continue my research when the tribes were forced to relocate. Once Clara's wound was dressed, Sarah reached into her medical bag and withdrew a small object wrapped in oilcloth. This may help explain what we're facing. She carefully unwrapped a fragment of clay tablet, roughly the size of a man's palm, etched with primitive pictographs. The fired clay showed humanoid figures surrounding what appeared to be a central glowing element. I found this at a burial site North Star bulldozed for their second mine shaft, Sarah explained. It's at least 5 centuries old, possibly older. Clara studied the tablet with intense focus, committing every detail to memory. These figures, they're similar to the Guardians, aren't they? Sarah nodded. According to tribal elders I interviewed before they were forced out, these beings weren't originally from this world. They came from beyond the sky during a time of great destruction. Eli frowned skeptically. You're suggesting these Guardians are not of this earth? I'm reporting what the oral histories claim, Sarah corrected. The stories say they brought both great knowledge and a terrible danger. The danger was contained using their advanced methods, but required constant guardianship. The spirit metal, Clara interjected. My father believed it wasn't just a mineral, but a technology, something the Guardians created to contain energy. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Your father reached the same conclusion I did then. The spirit metal forms a containment lattice throughout these mountains. The Guardians maintain it, preventing whatever is beneath from escaping. And North Star's mining operations are disrupting this containment, Eli concluded, pieces falling into place. That's why the attacks have increased. Precisely. Sarah traced the central element on the tablet. This represents what they're containing, what the tribes called the Great Fire that walks. Some kind of energy being or technology that caused massive destruction before it was imprisoned. Clara's face had grown pale. My father's notes mentioned a chamber deep in the mountain, a place where the containment could be accessed. He warned it should never be disturbed. And that's exactly what Reed was examining today, Sarah confirmed. They found the central chamber. A sudden crash against the church door startled them all. Eli drew his pistol while Sarah extinguished their lantern. In the sudden darkness, they heard a strange scraping sound, not pounding or kicking, but methodical, almost deliberate. "Guardians," Clara whispered. Before anyone could answer, the scratching stopped. A low, rumbling vocalization emanated from outside. Not animal growls, but something structured, almost like speech. Sarah moved cautiously to a window, peering through a crack in the boarded panes. "There are 3 of them," she whispered. "They're not attacking. They seem to be waiting." "For what?" Eli asked. Clara's breathing had quickened, her fever from the injury making her skin flush. "For me," she murmured. "They know who I am." "That's not possible," Eli objected. "It is, if they're intelligent," Sarah countered. "The tribal stories say they can sense bloodlines, that certain families were designated as intermediaries." Clara nodded weakly. "My father told me stories, said our family had a special responsibility. I thought they were just bedtime tales." Sarah returned to Clara's side, checking her temperature with concern. "The wound's infected. She needs proper medicine." "There's a native settlement 2 days' ride north," Eli said. "If we can reach them—" "One day," Clara interrupted, her eyes fever-bright but lucid. "There's a pass through Thunder Ridge. The Guardians won't follow us there." "How do you know that?" Eli asked. "The same way I know they're not here to hurt us," Clara replied, her voice taking on an unsettling certainty. "They're warning us. Something's happened at the mine. Something bad. They want us to go north. Sarah and Eli exchanged troubled glances. The fever's making her delirious, Sarah suggested. The strange vocalization came again, this time with a distinct pattern, 3 sounds, repeated, identical to the pattern of Eli's wooden whistle signal. That's impossible, Eli breathed. They couldn't know. They've been watching us, Clara said. Learning, assessing. She struggled to stand, leaning heavily on Sarah. We need to leave now. The company men won't be far behind. As if confirming her words, they heard the distant baying of hounds from the direction of town. North, then, Eli decided, helping gather their meager supplies. But first light. We'd break our necks trying that ridge in darkness. They'll guide us, Clara insisted, her certainty unnerving. The Guardians need us to reach the tribal elders before Reed activates the chamber. Before it's too late for everyone. Dawn broke with disorienting suddenness in the mountains. Shadows, retreating as golden light spilled over eastern ridges. They departed the church as the first rays touched its weathered steeple, Clara leaning weakly against Sarah in the saddle they shared. The fever had worsened overnight, leaving Clara drifting between lucidity and delirium. In her more coherent moments, she directed them toward a narrow trail that no map showed, a path her father had apparently discovered during his research. The tribal settlement lies beyond Thunder Ridge, she murmured, pointing toward a jagged peak looming ahead. The pass is hidden, looks like a dead end until you're right upon it. True to Clara's prediction, the Guardians had vanished with daylight, though Eli caught glimpses of large forms moving parallel to their route, keeping to the deeper shadows of the forest. Not following, he realized, escorting. By midday, they reached a sheer rock face that appeared to block further progress. Clara, roused briefly from her feverish haze, directed them to an almost invisible gap between boulders. The passage beyond twisted through the mountain, barely wide enough for a horse, until suddenly opening to reveal a breathtaking vista, a hidden valley nestled between protective peaks. Blackfoot's summer hunting grounds, Sarah explained, as they carefully descended the switchback trail. Sacred land supposedly protected by treaty. Another treaty North Star's ignoring, Eli observed grimly. They made camp that evening beside a clear stream, Clara's condition deteriorating steadily despite Sarah's efforts. The physician administered willow bark tea for the fever, her face tight with concern as she checked the infected wound. Without proper medicine, the infection could reach her blood, she confided to Eli while Clara slept fitfully. We need to reach the settlement by tomorrow. A sound from the darkness interrupted them, not the now familiar vocalization of the Guardians, but the soft whistle of a man. Eli drew his pistol, positioning himself protectively before the women. Who's there? He called. Show yourself. A figure emerged from the trees, a Native American man of middle years, dressed in a mixture of traditional clothing and traded goods. He carried a bow across his back and a rifle in his hands. Though the weapon remained pointed downward, "You bring sickness to our lands," he said in accented but clear English. Nodding toward Clara, "She needs help," Sarah replied, stepping forward. "Are you from the northern settlement?" The man studied them carefully before answering. "I am Two Hawks. I hunt for my people." His gaze lingered on Clara. "The mountain spirits have been restless. They speak of the return." "Return?" Eli questioned. Two Hawks approached slowly, kneeling beside Clara. His weathered face revealed nothing as he examined her, but his next words sent a chill through Eli. "The Boone child," he said simply. "Daughter of the professor who listened to our warnings. You knew her father?" Sarah asked. Two Hawks nodded. "He learned our language, respected the old stories, understood the danger beneath the mountains." He touched Clara's forehead gently. "She carries his knowledge now. The spirits have been waiting for her. Can you help her?" Eli pressed. "Our healer can treat the fever." Two Hawks stood. "But we must travel through the night. The company men follow close behind." How do you know that? Two hawks gestured toward the darkening forest. The guardians have been watching them, warning us. From his pouch he withdrew a small flute carved from bone. They respond to certain sounds. The old songs calm them, as if to demonstrate he played a haunting three-note melody. From the forest came an answering call, the same pattern they had heard at the church. You communicate with them, Sarah realized. Scientific curiosity, momentarily overriding exhaustion. Not words as you understand them, Two Hawks explained. Intentions, feelings. The old ones left us these songs when they appointed my ancestors as watchers. With practiced efficiency, Two Hawks constructed a travois for Clara, attaching it to his own horse. She will ride easier this way. We travel north, along the ridge. 3 hours to my people. As they prepared to depart, Eli noticed Two Hawks examining him with particular attention. You carry papers, the hunter stated. From the government to the mining company, Eli tensed. How could you know that? The spirits have shown our elders. These papers will bring great destruction if delivered. Two Hawks' expression remained impassive. You must decide which world you serve, Ranger, the one that sent you with those papers, or the one that child is trying to save. The sealed documents weighed heavily in Eli's coat as they traveled through the moonlit valley. His mission, once so clear, now felt like complicity in something monstrous. They rode in silence, guided by Two Hawks along paths invisible to untrained eyes. Twice they stopped as the hunter signaled caution, melting into the forest until patrols of company men passed below them on more obvious trails. They've split into search parties, Eli observed. At least 20 men. More coming, Two Hawks replied grimly. The spirits say the company director has called for soldiers from Fort Kearney, the same fort I was heading for, Eli added, the irony bitter on his tongue. Near midnight, they crested a final ridge to see dozens of lodges arranged in a protected hollow below. Smoke from cooking fires curled skyward, and in the center stood a larger structure, the council lodge. Two Hawks explained. Elder Whitefeather will want to see the Boone child immediately, he said, guiding them down the slope. He knew this day would come. What day? Sarah asked. Two Hawks played another sequence on his bone flute before answering, the notes hanging in the night air like a prayer. The day the seal begins to break. The day the fire that walks seeks freedom. Elder Whitefeather's weathered face remained impassive as Clara recited her father's research from memory, each word precise despite her weakened state. 3 days of the healer's treatments had brought her fever down, though shadows of exhaustion still darkened her eyes. The council lodge fell silent as she finished. 8 tribal elders sat in a semicircle, their expressions grave. Behind them stood Two Hawks and several younger warriors, while Eli and Sarah watched from the side. The professor understood, Whitefeather finally said, his English deliberate and clear. Few white men hear the truth in our stories. My father believed what's contained beneath the mountain is a weapon, Clara said. Something that could destroy entire regions if released. Whitefeather nodded slowly. Not a weapon as you understand it. The ancient ones called it Ember that Lives. It fell from the sky long before my grandfather's grandfather. It burned through the earth, consuming everything it touched, growing larger with each feeding, a self-propagating energy source, Sarah murmured. Scientific mind racing. The ancient ones, those you call guardians, came in pursuit, Whitefeather continued. They sacrificed many of their kind to contain the ember, creating the spirit metal to form a prison that would hold for all time. They taught our ancestors to maintain the seals, to watch for signs of weakening. And now North Star's mining has damaged these seals, Eli concluded. A commotion outside interrupted their council. Two Hawks slipped out, returning moments later with a grim expression. Riders approaching from the south, he reported. Company men, many guns. The camp erupted into organized activity, women gathering children, warriors collecting weapons, elders directing the evacuation to prepared positions higher in the mountains. They cannot have tracked us here so quickly, Sarah protested as they hurried toward the horses. They didn't need to track us, Eli replied, realization dawning. The documents I was carrying, they must have contained the coordinates for every native settlement in the region, including this one. They mounted hastily, following two hawks toward a ridge that offered both cover and a view of the approaching force. What they saw froze them with dread. Not just company men, but uniformed cavalry soldiers riding alongside, at least 30 in all. Federal troops, Eli breathed. Why would they? Because this was always bigger than a mining operation, came a cultured voice from behind them. They turned to find Augustus Reed standing on a rock outcropping, flanked by Merrick and 4 armed guards. The company director cut an incongruous figure in the wilderness, still wearing a tailored suit despite the rugged terrain, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his patrician features set in a mask of cold triumph. Miss Boone, he acknowledged with a slight nod. You've led us on quite a chase, just like your father, always making things more difficult than necessary. 2 hawks raised his rifle, but Reed's men were faster, disarming the native hunter with brutal efficiency. Dr. Lansing, a pleasure to see you've expanded your research interests, Reed continued smoothly. And Ranger Carver, the Marshal will be disappointed by your dereliction of duty. How did you find us? Eli demanded, mind racing for escape options. Reed smiled thinly. Your deputy's badge has been sending signals for days. A clever little device of my own design. Spirit metal allows for some remarkable applications in telegraphy. He gestured, and his men moved forward to secure them. From below, the sounds of conflict echoed as the cavalry engaged with tribal defenders. The silver's just a smokescreen, isn't it? Sarah challenged as her hands were bound. Your real interest is the energy source. Perceptive, Doctor. Reed's eyes gleamed with fervor. The spirit metal is impressive, certainly. But what it contains, unlimited energy, self-generating, impossible by all known laws of physics, that will reshape the balance of world power. It will destroy everything, Clara insisted. The Guardians contain it for a reason. The Guardians, as you call them, are simply another resource to be studied and utilized, Reed countered. We've already captured several specimens for examination. Fascinating biology, part organic, part something else entirely. From his coat, Reed withdrew an official-looking leather case embossed with the presidential seal. This may interest you, Ranger Carver. The same orders you were carrying, but with the full text, rather than the sanitized version given to couriers. He opened the case, revealing documents bearing official government seals. Full military authorization to secure what the War Department is calling Project Ember. The President himself has designated this a matter of national security. These tribal superstitions will not impede America's future. Eli's world tilted as he scanned the orders, authorizing removal of native populations, unrestricted mining operations, and containment of non-human entities in the territory. His entire career as a lawman suddenly felt like service to a corrupt machine rather than justice. You're making a terrible mistake, Clara warned, her voice stronger than her bound position suggested. The Ember cannot be controlled. We've already begun the extraction process, Reed replied dismissively. The central chamber has been breached. Our scientists estimate complete access within days. 2 hawks, though secured, spoke with quiet certainty. The mountains have already started to tremble. The ancient ones grow desperate. As if summoned by his words, a low rumble vibrated through the ground beneath them. Reed glanced down with momentary concern before regaining his composure. Minor seismic activity, expected when excavating at these depths. He gestured to his men. Bring them. The girl's memory will help us decipher the remaining chamber markings, and the good doctor's scientific background may prove useful. As they were marched toward horses, Clara caught Eli's eye with an urgent message. She glanced subtly toward the mountains behind them, where strange shadows moved with purpose among the trees, dozens of them, far more guardians than they had ever seen together. The awakening has begun, 2 hawks whispered, so quietly only Eli could hear. The ancient ones gather for war. The mining camp sprawled across the mountainside like an iron scar. Steam-powered drills, or processing equipment, and armed guards creating a perimeter of industrial determination. Clara, Sarah, and Eli had been separated upon arrival. Clara taken to the main research facility, while the others were confined in a makeshift stockade with captured tribal members. Night had fallen when Eli discovered the loose board in their prison wall. Working silently, he widened the gap enough for a body to squeeze through. The guards, confident in their security, had grown lax with routine. "I'm going for Clara and Sarah," Eli whispered to two hawks who had been captured with them. "Can your people create a distraction?" The tribal hunter nodded. "When the moon touches the western peak, listen for the eagle cry." Eli slipped through the gap, staying in shadows as he navigated the camp. His years as a ranger had taught him the rhythms of sentry rotations and the blind spots in perimeter security. Even so, reaching the main facility undetected seemed nearly impossible until the distraction came. It began with a sound like thunder from the northern ridge, followed by what appeared to be signal fires igniting along the mountaintops. Guards shouted in confusion as something massive crashed through the equipment yard, sending machinery toppling. In the chaos, no one noticed Eli slipping through a side entrance. Inside, the facility hummed with activity, scientists poring over specimens and artifacts, armed guards stationed at intervals, and at the center, a large chamber where Sarah Lansing stood, unwillingly assisting researchers examining what appeared to be Guardian remains. "The cellular structure is unlike anything in modern science," a white-coated man was saying. "The outer layers combine organic material with something crystalline, almost metallurgical." "They're not dead," Sarah replied, her voice tight with controlled anger. "They're dormant. This is tantamount to vivisection." "Your ethical concerns are noted, Doctor," Reed's voice responded from nearby. "But these specimens may hold the key to controlling the energy source." Eli retreated before being spotted, searching for Clara. He found her in a smaller room, surrounded by maps and artifacts. Unlike Sarah, she wasn't working. She sat perfectly still, eyes closed, seemingly in a trance-like state, while Reed and a military officer observed her with fascination. "She's been like this for hours," Reed was explaining. "Ever since we brought her near the chamber artifacts. Some kind of sympathetic response. Is she of any use to us this way?" The officer demanded. "Immensely. Whatever connection she's formed is revealing patterns in the chamber markings our linguists couldn't decipher. The recording equipment is documenting everything." Eli withdrew, formulating a plan. The eagle cry he'd been promised came moments later, a piercing sound that drew guards toward the perimeter. Simultaneously, the lights flickered throughout the facility, plunging sections into darkness. In the confusion, Eli moved. He took down a guard silently, appropriating the man's uniform jacket before heading to Sarah's location. When the lights stabilized, he was just another guard escorting her to another section. "Eli," she gasped when they were momentarily alone. "How did you—" "No time," he interrupted. "Where would they take artifacts from the chamber?" "The secure laboratory in the East Wing," Sarah replied. "That's where they're keeping the Guardian specimens too." "But Clara, we're getting her next," Eli assured her. "But first, we need a distraction bigger than what the tribe can provide." The secure laboratory proved less secure in the midst of the continuing perimeter alerts. Inside, they found glass containment units housing dormant Guardian forms, connected to equipment that monitored and apparently sedated them. Along one wall stood a table, covered with artifacts recovered from the chamber, including metallic fragments that pulsed with faint blue light. "Spirit metal," Sarah whispered, examining the fragments. "They're trying to replicate it." As she spoke, something clattered to the floor from one of the containment units, a large, iridescent scale that had apparently detached from a Guardian's body. Eli retrieved it cautiously, noting its unusual warmth and the way it seemed to respond to the spirit metal fragments, glowing more intensely when brought near them. "It's some kind of resonance," Sarah observed, scientific curiosity momentarily overriding their dire situation. "The scale responds to the metal and—" She paused, eyes widening. Eli, what if we could use this to wake them? Understanding dawned. A distraction big enough to extract Clara? Sarah nodded grimly. More than a distraction. These beings are intelligent, communicating, and Reed is treating them like laboratory animals. They deserve the chance to fight back. Working quickly, Sarah adjusted the sedation equipment, reducing the flow to each containment unit while Eli stood guard at the door. As the sedation levels dropped, the Guardian forms began to stir, massive limbs shifting, internal lights pulsing beneath semi-transparent skin. "We don't have much time," Eli warned. Watching the corridor anxiously. "Almost done," Sarah replied. She placed the Guardian scale directly on the spirit metal fragments. The reaction was immediate. Both began to pulse with intensifying light, creating a resonance that seemed to penetrate the containment units. The largest Guardian's eyes snapped open, intelligence and rage evident in their depths. It focused directly on Sarah and Eli, but made no aggressive move toward them. Instead, it placed one massive hand against the glass, a gesture almost like communication. "It recognizes we're helping," Sarah whispered. A commotion in the hallway signaled their time had run out. Guards were approaching, drawn by equipment alarms triggered by the sedation changes. "We need to get to Clara now," Eli insisted, pulling Sarah toward a service door. "But the Guardians will create exactly the chaos we need." Eli pocketed the resonating scale. "And maybe even help us, if your theory about their intelligence is right." They slipped into a maintenance corridor as the first containment unit shattered behind them, followed by a sound like no earthly roar Eli had ever heard. Rage and freedom and purpose combined into a battle. Cry that shook the very foundations of the facility. Alarms blared throughout the complex as they navigated toward Clara's location. The sounds of destruction spreading rapidly behind them. "We've started something we can't control," Sarah said breathlessly as they ran. "Reed started this," Eli corrected grimly. "We're just evening the odds." Chaos reigned through the facility. Released Guardians moved with deadly purpose, targeting equipment and guards, but seemingly avoiding scientists and native prisoners. Alarms wailed as emergency protocols activated, evacuation orders blaring from speaking tubes mounted on walls. Eli and Sarah reached Clara's room to find it empty, the observation equipment destroyed. A trail of blood led to the corridor, where a guard lay unconscious, his sidearm missing. "She's gone," Eli realized. "Either escaped or taken deeper," Sarah finished, pointing to a set of fresh footprints in the spilled chemical powders on the floor. Multiple boots heading toward the mine entrance. They followed the tracks through the panicked facility, dodging fleeing personnel and avoiding the methodical destruction wreaked by the freed Guardians. At the mine entrance, they found evidence of a struggle. More blood, a discarded military cap, and Clara's hair ribbon caught on a jagged timber. "Reed's taking her to the chamber," Sarah concluded. "He thinks she can help him activate it, especially in this trance state." The mine shaft descended at a steep angle, electric lights strung along support beams, providing uneven illumination. They moved carefully, aware that each step took them closer to both Clara and whatever Reed hoped to unleash. The tunnel walls changed as they descended, transitioning from rough-hewn rock to something smoother, almost glazed. After half a mile, they encountered a junction, where the mining operation had broken through into what was clearly an artificial structure, a tunnel with perfectly curved walls composed of a material similar to spirit metal but darker, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. "This wasn't built by humans," Sarah whispered, examining the seamless construction. "No joints, no seams." "Guardian technology," Eli agreed, remembering the tribal stories. "Part of the original containment." A distant sound echoed through the tunnels, a mechanical grinding followed by what might have been a scream. They quickened their pace, guided by fresh bootprints in the dust and discarded equipment marking Reed's path. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber where Northstar's operation had established a forward research base. Tables covered with equipment surrounded what appeared to be an excavation into the chamber floor. Scientists worked frantically while guards maintained a perimeter, all under the watchful eye of Augustus Reed, and there was Clara, still in her trance-like state, being guided toward the excavation by Reed himself. Her movements mechanical as though sleepwalking. "We need a distraction," Eli murmured, taking stock of the armed men before they could formulate a plan. The chamber shuddered as a distant explosion reverberated through the mountain. Equipment toppled, and several support beams cracked ominously. "The Guardians," Sarah realized. "They're attacking the main facility above us." In the confusion, they advanced closer, taking cover behind abandoned equipment. Close enough now to hear Reed's excited commands. "The girl is responding to the containment mechanism," he was telling a military officer. "Look at her hands. She's trying to manipulate the control surface." Clara stood at the edge of the excavation, her hands hovering over what appeared to be a console embedded in the ancient floor. The surface glowed with patterns that shifted in response to her proximity. "Sir, we should evacuate," the officer insisted. "The entire mountain is becoming unstable. We're too close to abandon this now," Reed snapped. "The energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's down there, it's waking up." Another tremor, stronger than the first, shook the chamber. Several guards lost their footing, and a section of ceiling collapsed, crushing equipment and narrowly missing personnel. In the chaos, Eli spotted an opportunity. A rack of mining explosives had been left unattended near their position. He quickly assembled a makeshift charge, using his ranger training in demolitions. "Get ready to grab Clara when this blows," he told Sarah, setting the short fuse. The explosion was more powerful than anticipated, destroying a support column and plunging half the chamber into darkness as electrical systems failed. In the confusion, Eli and Sarah rushed forward. Eli tackled a guard moving toward them, while Sarah made directly for Clara. Reed, seeing their approach, pulled Clara behind him and drew a pistol, not a standard revolver, but a weapon with a strange silvery barrel that hummed with energy. "A spirit metal prototype," he announced, aiming at Sarah. Quite devastating at this range. Before he could fire, a massive form dropped from the damaged ceiling, a Guardian, larger than any they'd seen before. It landed between Reed and Sarah, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what seemed like recognition as it regarded Clara. Reed fired his weapon. The energy blast struck the Guardian directly, burning a hole through its torso. But instead of falling, the creature continued its advance, regenerating even as it moved. Reed's expression shifted from confidence to fear as he backed toward the excavation, dragging Clara with him. "Stay back," he shouted, firing again. "The containment is nearly breached." "I can release it." In Clara's hands, something now gleamed, a crystal rod she had somehow extracted from the ancient console during the chaos. Her eyes, though still unfocused, now burned with an internal light that matched the patterns on the Guardian's skin. "The key," Sarah gasped, recognizing the artifact from tribal descriptions. "She's removed the containment key." The chamber shuddered violently as a deep rumbling built beneath them. The excavation pit began to glow with increasing intensity, casting harsh shadows across Reed's triumphant face. "Too late to stop it now," he called over the growing roar. "The Ember awakens!" The excavation pit erupted with blinding light, forcing everyone to shield their eyes. When vision returned, the chamber had transformed. The ancient floor had reconfigured itself, revealing a spiraling ramp descending toward a pulsating core of energy far below. "The primary containment chamber," Reed announced, his voice reverential despite the chaos surrounding them. Exactly as theorized. He dragged the still entranced Clara toward the ramp, the crystal key clutched in her hand, glowing in resonance with the energy below. The remaining guards formed a defensive perimeter around them, weapons trained on Eli and Sarah. "Reed, you don't understand what you're doing," Sarah shouted over the increasing rumble. "The tribal histories all warn this entity cannot be controlled." "Tribal superstitions," Reed dismissed, though uncertainty flickered across his face as the mountain shook more violently. "This is pure energy, Doctor. the future of American power and influence. The Guardian that had intercepted Reed's spirit metal weapon was now joined by others, dropping through the damaged ceiling or emerging from tunnel offshoots. They formed a loose semicircle, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in synchronized sequences, communicating. Eli realized. Reed reached into his coat and withdrew a small, cylindrical container made of spirit metal. Inside, visible through a viewing port, writhed what appeared to be a sliver of living flame, orange-white and somehow aware, pressing against its confines as if testing for weaknesses. A sample extracted 3 days ago, Reed explained, seeming eager to boast despite the deteriorating situation. Just a fragment of the whole, yet it contains energy equivalent to 20 tons of dynamite. Imagine what the complete entity could power or destroy, Eli countered, inching closer despite the guard's weapons. Your own scientists must have warned you. Of course they did, Reed snapped. Science advances through calculated risk. The Ember will be contained and controlled using refined spirit metal technologies. The military applications alone justify any danger. Another violent tremor knocked several guards off balance. Eli seized the opportunity, tackling the nearest man and claiming his weapon. Sarah simultaneously lunged toward Clara, only to be intercepted by another guard. The confrontation froze as a new sound filled the chamber, a harmonic resonance emanating from the gathered Guardians. Their synchronized tones vibrated through the ancient structure, causing the spirit metal components to resonate in response. Clara's eyes suddenly cleared, awareness returning as she looked in confusion at the crystal key in her hand. What? Where am I? Clara! Sarah called. Don't move. You're at the edge of the containment chamber. Reed tightened his grip on Clara's arm. The key, Miss Boone. You will complete what you've started and open the final seal. Don't listen to him, Eli warned, his appropriated weapon now trained on Reed. That key is part of what's keeping the Ember contained. Clara's gaze traveled from the key to the pulsating energy below, recognition dawning. My father's notes. This is the primary lock. It only opens from the inside to prevent accidental release. Exactly, Reed confirmed impatiently. And you've already activated the internal mechanism. One final step and we secure unlimited energy for the nation. The chamber shuddered again, more violently than before. Cracks appeared along the walls as supports failed throughout the mine. The excavation pit's glow intensified, the energy patterns becoming erratic. The containment is already failing, Sarah realized aloud. Removing the key destabilized it. The largest Guardian stepped forward, its movement causing the guards to open fire. Bullets seemed to pass through its form with minimal effect as it approached Clara. One massive hand extended toward the crystal key. Don't let it take the key, Reed shouted to his men, raising his spirit metal weapon again. Eli fired first, his shot striking Reed's arm. The prototype weapon discharged wildly, blasting a hole through the ancient floor and further destabilizing the structure. Reed stumbled, but maintained his grip on both Clara and the container holding the Ember fragment. Enough! Reed's composure finally shattered. He pressed the spirit metal container against Clara's throat. Finish the unlocking sequence, or I release this fragment right here. It may be small, but it will consume everything in this chamber, starting with you. The Guardian halted its advance, seeming to assess the threat. Its bioluminescent patterns shifted to a pulsing red as it communicated with the others. Clara, now fully aware, looked from Reed to the Guardian to the crystal key in her hand. My father said there was another way, she said quietly. The key doesn't just unlock. In the right configuration, it can strengthen the seal. Nonsense, Reed spat, though doubt clouded his expression. Clara's eyes met Eli's, a silent message passing between them. He nodded slightly, understanding her intent without words. I'll do it, she told Reed. I'll finish the sequence. But you need to let me approach the console alone. The mechanism responds only to precise movements. Reed hesitated, then relaxed his grip slightly. Try anything, and I release the fragment. As Clara stepped toward the ancient console at the top of the spiraling ramp, the Guardian's harmonic tones shifted to a lower register. The crystal key in her hand pulsed in response, its internal light patterns aligning with those on the Guardian's skin. The ground beneath them gave a final, decisive lurch. Reed lost his footing, the container slipping momentarily from his grasp. Eli lunged forward, not toward Reed, but toward the container, catching it before it could shatter on the ancient floor. In that moment of distraction, Clara made her move, not toward the unlocking sequence Reed expected, but toward the waiting Guardian. The crystal key extended before her like an offering. Time seemed to slow as Clara extended the crystal key toward the Guardian. The massive being's luminescent patterns intensified, rippling across its form in accelerating sequences. It reached one enormous hand toward the key, not grasping, but aligning its strange, elongated fingers around it, creating a framework of light. No. Reed lunged forward, his prototype weapon raised despite his injured arm. Eli tackled him from behind, the two men crashing to the floor of the ancient chamber. They struggled for control of the weapon, its spirit metal components humming with dangerous energy. Around them, the remaining guards and scientists fled as the entire structure groaned under mounting pressure from below. Clara stood transfixed as the Guardian's touch transformed the key. The crystal rod elongated, its internal light separating into distinct channels that flowed between her hands and the Guardian's fingers. Knowledge flooded her mind, not in words but in images, sensations, and understandings that transcended language. "I see it now," she whispered. "I understand." Sarah approached cautiously. "Clara, what's happening?" "My family." Clara's voice sounded distant, touched with wonder. "We were chosen centuries ago, not just as watchers but as potential bridges." Her hand moved to a small stone pendant hanging at her throat, her father's, passed down through generations. Its markings, she now realized, matched those on the Guardian's skin. The Guardian's harmonic tones changed pitch, joined by the others in a resonance that vibrated through the chamber. The key between them pulsed in response, each flash revealing more of the ancient machinery beneath the surface. A vast lattice of spirit metal extending throughout the mountain, all connected to the chamber below. "The containment isn't just physical," Clara explained, understanding flowing through her. "It's a network, part mechanical, part biological. The Guardians themselves are components, living extensions of the containment system." Reed broke free from Eli momentarily, raising his weapon. "This changes nothing. The energy will be harvested." The Guardian nearest Clara moved with unexpected speed, placing itself between her and Reed's aim. The spirit metal blast struck it directly, burning through its form. Yet instead of falling, the creature's body absorbed the energy, its patterns flaring brilliantly before channeling the force down into the floor. Where it dispersed through the ancient lattice, their conduits, Sarah realized, scientific understanding catching up to Clara's intuitive knowledge. They don't just guard the ember. They regulate its energy, bleeding off excess to prevent critical accumulation. Eli had regained his feet, still holding the container with the ember fragment. "What happens to this piece Reed extracted?" "It needs to be reintegrated," Clara replied, certainty in her voice. "The fragment seeks to rejoin the whole, growing more unstable the longer it's separated." The mountain shook violently, sections of the ceiling collapsing around them. The energy below pulsed erratically, tendrils of living fire reaching upward through widening cracks in the containment field. Reed made a final, desperate lunge toward Clara and the key. This time, multiple Guardians intercepted him. Their touch seemed to immobilize him, his body rigid as their bioluminescence flowed across his skin. "What are they doing to him?" Sarah gasped. "Communicating," Clara answered. Showing him the truth he refused to see. Reed's expression transformed from rage to horror as the Guardian's vision filled his mind. The true nature of the ember. The destruction it had caused on countless worlds before this one. The sacrifice made to contain it. and the consequences of its release. When they released him, Reed fell to his knees. "It's a destroyer of worlds," he whispered, face ashen. "Not a resource, but a parasite, consuming everything it touches to expand itself." The chamber gave another violent lurch, the ramp toward the containment core beginning to disintegrate. Clara turned toward the largest guardian, a silent communication passing between them. "I know what I have to do," she said, a strange calm settling over her features. "The key needs to be reinserted by someone with the bloodline, but from within the containment field itself." "That's suicide," Eli protested. "The energy levels down there would incinerate any human instantly." Clara touched the tribal pendant at her throat. "Not necessarily. My ancestors were changed when the original pact was made. Our blood carries elements of the Guardians themselves, spirit metal infused at a cellular level." Sarah stepped forward. "There must be another way." "There isn't," Clara replied gently. "The containment is failing. Without direct intervention, the Ember will break free within hours, consuming everything in an expanding radius. Towns, cities, eventually the continent." She turned to Eli, reaching for the container holding the Ember fragment. "This needs to go back first, to stabilize the pattern." Eli hesitated, then placed the dangerous container in her hands. "I'm going with you." Clara shook her head. "You can't survive down there. But there is something you must do instead." She glanced at the subdued Reed and the military documents he had carried. "The world needs to know the truth. About the Ember, the Guardians, all of it." The largest Guardian extended its hand again, this time offering something to Clara, a small crystalline object that resembled a seed, glowing with inner light. "What is that?" Sarah asked. "Insurance," Clara replied cryptically, accepting the object and securing it within her pendant. The chamber shuddered again, more violently. The way out was rapidly becoming blocked by falling debris. "You need to go," Clara urged them. "Get as far from the mountain as possible." Sarah embraced her briefly. "Your father would be proud." Eli's farewell was simpler, a respectful nod between equals that conveyed more than words could express. He grabbed Reed's arm, forcing the shaken man to his feet. "You're going to help us tell the world what really happened here." As they retreated toward the tunnel, Clara turned toward the failing containment field, the crystal key in one hand, the Ember fragment in the other. The Guardians formed a circle around her, their harmonics rising to a pitch that made the spirit metal throughout the chamber resonate in response. Clara stepped onto the disintegrating ramp, descending toward the pulsing core with steady determination. Behind her, the Guardian's light patterns shifted to match those awakening within her own skin, faint at first, then growing stronger with each step she took toward her destiny. 1 month after the mountain collapsed in upon itself, Eli Carver stood at the edge of the newly established boundary markers. Behind him, a small delegation of government officials shifted uncomfortably in the summer heat, their formal attire ill-suited to the Montana wilderness. "The treaty is signed, then," Eli confirmed, watching as Two Hawks and Elder Whitefeather reviewed the documents one final time. "Signed and registered with the territorial court," the lead official replied stiffly. "Though I still fail to understand why the government has ceded nearly 800 square miles to tribal protection with such unusual stipulations." Sarah Lansing stepped forward, her new role as scientific liaison evident in the respect the tribal representatives showed her. "The geological instability alone justifies the restrictions on mining and development," she answered smoothly. "The seismic aftershocks could continue for years. What remained unspoken was the true reason for the treaty, the testimony of Augustus Reed, once North Star's ambitious director, now a haunted man dedicated to containing the knowledge of what lay beneath these mountains. His first-hand account of the catastrophic potential of Project Ember, combined with the mysterious destruction of the entire mining operation, had been enough to convince even the most skeptical officials that some secrets were best left buried. The tribal elders finished their review, nodding satisfaction. "We will honor this boundary as our ancestors did," Elder Whitefeather stated formally. No one shall disturb the sleeping fire. As the officials departed, Sarah joined Eli at the boundary marker. "You're not going with them," she observed. "My resignation from the Rangers was accepted yesterday," Eli confirmed, touching the badge he still wore out of habit. The metal felt strangely warm beneath his fingers, occasionally catching the light in ways ordinary silver never could. "Seems delivering confidential documents to unintended recipients is frowned upon. So is exposing government conspiracy," Sarah added, with a wry smile. "Though in my case, the university is surprisingly supportive. Geological and anthropological research opportunities, they're calling it." Two Hawks approached, his normally stoic expression softened by what might have been amusement. "The spirits say the mountain is settling. The new guardians are learning their duties." Both Eli and Sarah followed his gaze toward the distant peaks where strange lights sometimes appeared at night, bioluminescent, patterns moving with purpose along the ridgelines. Neither human nor animal, but something in between, emerging from the transformed heart of the mountain. "Any sign of Clara?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. Two Hawks shook his head. "Not as she was. But her essence continues." The morning after the mountain's collapse, they had returned with tribal warriors to search for survivors. What they found instead was a transformed landscape, the mining facilities entirely gone, replaced by strange, crystalline formations that resonated with harmonic tones when approached. And at the epicenter, a single seedling growing from otherwise barren ground, a plant unlike any known species, with translucent leaves that pulsed with internal light, in patterns reminiscent of both guardian skin and the ancient containment lattice. The crystal seed she carried, Sarah had realized immediately. It wasn't insurance for the containment system. It was insurance for her, a way to transform rather than be destroyed. In the weeks that followed, the seedling had grown with impossible speed into a sapling already 10 feet tall, its branches extending in precise geometric patterns. The tribal elders now tended it with reverence, recognizing it as both monument and guardian. Clara's consciousness evolved into something that could maintain the seal she had restored. "Will you stay?" Sarah asked Eli now, as they watched the official's wagon disappear down the trail. "Someone needs to patrol this boundary," he replied, his hand unconsciously touching the badge that had subtly changed since that day. The metal had partly transformed, occasionally glowing with faint luminescence when he neared places of power. "Keep the curious and the greedy at bay. And you?" Two Hawks asked Sarah. "Research," she replied simply. "There's so much to learn about the Guardians, the containment technology, the tribal histories, knowledge that must be preserved but protected." As they spoke, a distant sound reached them, the distinctive harmonic tones of guardians moving along their patrol routes. The melody had become familiar over the weeks, no longer inspiring fear, but rather a strange comfort. The mountains were protected once more. Eli thought of the documents he'd carried that day, orders that would have authorized the very exploitation that nearly unleashed catastrophe. How certain he'd been of his path then, how clear his duty had seemed. Now, the world held deeper complexities and responsibilities. That evening, he walked alone to the sapling at the epicenter, the tree already developing a canopy that cast dappled, luminescent light on the ground below. Some of the tribal members claimed they could hear whispered guidance when they meditated beneath its branches. Eli couldn't hear words, but he sometimes felt a presence, familiar yet transformed. "I'm staying, Clara," he said quietly to the gently swaying branches. "Someone needs to keep watch." A soft breeze rustled through the sapling, its leaves momentarily brightening in a pattern that couldn't be coincidental. 3 pulses, the exact cadence of the wooden whistle signal they had once shared. Eli smiled and touched his transformed badge, feeling the subtle resonance between it and the tree. The mountains had claimed both Clara and the Ember, but in different ways. One consumed and contained, the other elevated and transformed. The balance maintained, as it had been for centuries before. As twilight deepened, Eli turned toward his newly built cabin at the boundary's edge. Behind him, guardians emerged from the forest to take up positions around the sapling, their bioluminescent patterns synchronized with its gentle pulsing. Protectors and protected joined in an ancient duty renewed for another generation.